trouble finds you. There ain't no law in this world that'll keep it off you. Fact of it is, seems the more law there is, the more trouble comes with it. Not like setting order to chaos ain't something natural to common folk. Setting order to the wild places of this wide world is about the only thing that lets most folks live comfortably. Problem being, the world on its own is trouble. And trouble don't like straight fence lines and stagecoaches. Trouble don't like folks stepping all over where it's been. And trouble it's been everywhere. Point being, Grilby had had about enough as he could stomach of trouble and all its lot. They'd been close friends a long, long time, but he'd kicked it years ago. Leastwise, he thought he had. Put it out to pasture with the rest of the wiles of his youth, when he was fixing himself up to be a rattlesnake in a coal pit, just biting everything he could get a hold of. But fires burn cold over time, and Grilby figured himself for a candle right about now. Something small and comfortable, and warm enough if you wanted. All fire is trouble, though. Best friends, those two. Nearly closer than smoke. Nearly. And Grilby had gotten mighty comfortable in his little bar in Deadwood. It was a quiet town for quiet folk. Out west enough to feel wild and dangerous, but close enough to Fort Chase to keep most of the rougher folks moving on their way. Wasn't much there by way of valuables. Hell, it started out as a trading post. Matter of fact, the only reason the town managed to grow up was on account of the river winding nearby, making the lands around good for herding. The Dreamer A.D. brand was on every animal with 4 hooves between Fort Chase and Breeze Point, and half the folks in Deadwood worked under him for one reason or another. There was a bank, a tailor, a general store, that one was new, and of course the local watering hole was Grilby's place. They were in the works of building an inn and a church, since the stagecoach had just started putting down track in their town, mostly 'cause of the fort. Rumor had it Fort Chase might be getting a train station laid near it soon. Really, life in Deadwood was starting to look mighty blessed. And just when things are starting to look their best, now that's when trouble likes to make its grand entrance. As fate would have it, trouble came rolling up with the stagecoach that evening, sniffing after more of its ilk. He was looking mighty humble, all things considered, all dressed in black, but that was the standard of fare for a reverend. Someone might have even mistaken him for a pastor of the new church if it weren't for how he walked straight for the bar as soon as the coach dropped him off, and the peculiar happening that he decided to ride shotgun coming into town. Grilby didn't take much notice of him at first. Sure, he looked a bit rough, but most folks this far out west were rough enough to wear out their clothes from the inside. There was a bit of a sense about him, just enough offness that Grilby gave him a second glance when he took his seat at the bar. The only good thing about those folks that have known trouble was that they tend to have a sense of it in other people. They get a sight of it, like catching heat waves on a summer day. But while Grilby certainly felt something peculiar about the shade that had darkened his door, trouble didn't quite bleed out of him in the ways he'd expected. So he let him alone to order his drink in peace, kicking wasp nests and all that. Nah, it wasn't till further in the evening that Grilby really got to place why this stranger kept shivering up his spine the way he did. There was a pair of younger travelers at the bar, cow-punchers by the way they talked, though they were awful green, and they took a keen interest in the wanted board up by the front door. Too close to the fort, the law had seen fit to keep Grilby up to date on the shady characters coming through, just in case. The board had seen a good deal of use, too. Torn pages littered the board, most of the printings newer, with various reward amounts typed in with a heavy printing press. 2 of the posters, though, were old, worn, crinkled around the edges from the year's shuffle, but still there. A pair of outlaws that had never been caught, and if the shoddy work of the printed sketch were any indication, they'd never really been rightly looked at. It was a pair of monsters, rare for outlaws, as most were a bit too frail to survive the business for long. Both characters had their handkerchiefs tied around their faces, hats pulled low over their eyes. But The one was billowing smoke, and the other had a pair of bright, keen eyes that glowed out from underneath the brim of his hat. For those passing by who could read, there was under each image a name, a short description of their looks, attacks, and crimes, not the least of which being gunfighting and train robbing. At the very bottom of the page, in large bold print, 5,000 reward, wanted dead or alive. Most folks agreed $5,000 was an awful lot of money for the dust of a pair of outlaws. Certainly the pair of greenhorns eyeing the wanted posters thought so. Still can't believe they ain't caught those fellers yet. He was a human, sandy blonde hair with a thin weaselly sort of face that matched the tenor of his voice. You'd think 5,000 would put the whole country chasing after him. What I wouldn't do for that kind of money. His companion was a cat monster that carried himself like a bear with the size to match. Wouldn't have to hire out at the Dreamer place eating dust all day, that's for damn sure. Yeah, but they ain't hit a train for years. Weaselface waved Grilby over to refill his drink. Reckon they got killed by some other outlaw somewhere? Or maybe they're laying low in the wild country somewhere. I'd be laying low if I was them. All that gold they stole. Probably set 'em up for life. No outlaws ever set up for life. That was when the stranger spoke up, snapping up both the cowhand's attention and gleaning a curious look from Grilby as well. The stranger's long, spindly fingers were wrapped around his whiskey glass, that wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, though there was a tilt to his head that said he'd caught those boys in a long sideways glare, tracking them out of the corner of his eye, hunched over his glass like he had a look more like a hungry buzzard than a parson. Puts an itch in you, that kind of work, he continued, his voice low and smooth, like fire right up in your veins. Sure, there's folks who find a way to ignore it for a spell, but it's always there, talking at you. You could go riding one last time, dust off that six-shooter, find yourself one last train, get away with it one last time. The stranger drained his glass. And that's when even the most dangerous outlaw gets caught. It was then that he jabbed a thumb against the brim of his hat, tipping it back to unobscure his face, and though Grilby always burned warm, there was a moment where a chill like east wind whipped through him. Who knows? Maybe you boys'll finally be the lucky ones to catch hell-raising Gunsmoke when they hit the last train. There was an uneasy silence before the weasel-faced hand spoke up. You with the law, mister? When I want to be. The stranger flashed them a grin, an easy-going sort of smile that caged snakes behind his teeth. Ain't you two got somewhere to be? Catching the hint a little faster than his friend, the cat monster stood from his seat. Reckon we do. Come on. And with a discarded protest from his friend, the two cowhands ushered themselves from the bar, leaving it empty. You always were bad for business, Grilby muttered, though there was a brightening spark in his flame that smiled more than his voice let on. What put you back on my side of the country, Gaster? Gaster and Grilby were quite the night and day to each other, all things considered, and not just on account of Grilby being a fire monster and Gaster favoring his all-black dress. For one, Gaster was a spindly sort of fellow, all bone and magic and not much else, and tall enough to remind someone of a gangly old desert tree clinging to the edge of the wilderness. Meanwhile, Grilby was broad-shouldered and hard. He carried himself like a rock on a hillside. He was the kind of fire that would burn long and slow. Where Gaster was all crooked lines and bending limbs, Grilby was a barred door and a brick wall. And while Gaster's voice was a smooth, rolling sound like warm coffee, Grilby's was sharp like tumbled gravel. But they got along just fine. You know, it took me ages to find you out here. Gaster smiled as Grilby refilled his glass. Never figured you'd put down roots in a whiskey barrel. It's an honest living, and it's easy enough. Grilby ushered around the empty room. Don't get too used to this picture, though. Soon as the hotel gets finished, the stage will drag in more folks than we'll be able to count. How about you, working for the law?" "Nah." Gaster waved his hand, swatting away the thought. "Mostly I just travel. I had a one-time job in a posse south of here, and that's about as close as I got. I heard rumors of a gunslinger getting hired down there when the Bradley boys got caught." Gaster flashed him a mischievous smirk. "The word traveled all the way up here, did it?" "It was talk of the town for a bit." Grilby picked up a glass to polish it idly. "Any quick shot not hired by the army or behind bars tends to get people excited." Gaster nodded. "And, Parson get up your idea to travel unnoticed?" "You don't think it works?" "Just funny." Grilby smirked. "What happens if someone asks you to give a sermon?" "I'll give one." Gaster slipped a little black book free of his jacket pocket. "I might not do a damn thing this thing says, but I have read it once or twice. Ain't there a special place in hell for hypocrites and the like?" "I already lived through hell, lived with it for a while. I'm sure the devil'll be pleased I finally come home." The two of them laughed, and Grilby sparkled brightly in the dim bar room. The light outside was getting long and golden, the evening rolling in, and with it the nightly chill. But for now, inside with an old friend, Grilby was warm. Warm until Gaster's laughter died away, and a distant look etched itself into the lines of his skull, the lights of his eyes turning scattered and dim around the edges. And Grilby saw it then, the sure signs of trouble, leaking out onto the counter of his bar like the slow creep of a coming mist. It was as familiar as it was unsettling. Grilby thought briefly of the shotgun he kept under the counter. "So, Devil," Grilby said, "you ain't answered my question yet." The hat dipped just a mite on Gaster's head, hiding his face once more in shadow. "What are you doing here? Doubt it's just a happy accident you tumbled in my bar in particular after 5 years," Gaster said darkly, "since you cut out on me." A heavy silence draped across the two of them. There was magic and intention there. Grilby could taste it, sour and bitter, the stings of regret and its ilk, remnants of how bad their terms had been when he left. But there was no bite to it, no ill intent. "Gonna be honest with you, Grilby. I walked in here still angry," Gaster said finally, pushing his drink away as if it somehow gone stale. "But damn it if it ain't good to see you again. You haven't changed. And you ain't stopped dodging questions." A smile lit Gaster's face crooked and tense. "You were hard to find." "That was intentional." "Not hard enough, though." There was a shift in Gaster's tone, sharp, the easy-going drawl lifting out of his voice. "You remember the Higgins gang?" "Higgins." Grilby squinted thoughtfully at Gaster as the skeleton rolled himself a cigarette. Higgins. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't rightly place it. "'Cause they remember us," Gaster continued. "Rather, they remember you." "You gonna get to the point with all this, or am I gonna have to wait until they're on my front porch to ask?" "We run into them on the Central Pacific when it was new, after the territory laid tracks west of the mountains. They tried to bully us off the train. Salem Higgins was their head at the time." At the name Salem, the memory come rushing back crystal clear. A dam he bricked up in the back of his head springing loose. Salem Higgins, all dressed up like a gentleman robber, a 6-shooter in each hand, his eyes lit up by engine sparks, his face a grimace full of soot. Grilby blinked the image out of his head and said simply, "Humans don't have 9 lives." "No, but they have kin." Gaster said. And there's a lot of Higginsons heading this way ever since they got kicked out of Missouri. Did too much rough housing down there, sounds like. Killed a sheriff and one of his posse on their way after a bank robbery. Gaster took a breath from his cigarette, smoke curling between his teeth and snaking around the collar of his shirt. They're planning something big. I don't know what. Probably trying to land a final score before they make a run to wild country. How'd you find out all this? Got a wire asking me to be a part of the posse to take them in, since I was in the region, about 2 days after the shooting happened. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. So I poked around the town for a bit and trailed them this way. Stopped when I found out they dried gulch some poor bastard just because he was a fire. There's not a lot of your types this side of the Mississippi. Grilby swore. Let us shuck right out of there and been trying to find you ever since, Gaster said. I tried not to ask round too much. Didn't want folks asking a bunch of questions and remembering too much when the Higgins gang comes calling. But I figured they'll come, especially once that track gets laid at the fort. What fool gang goes after a fort? A fool gang that's 20 members strong and recruiting anyone that can hold a gun ready to die standing up for some cash. And Grilby, they've got some dead shots in 'em. Gaster flicked his wrist, sending a nearby ashtray sliding within reach of his finished cigarette. He stubbed it out, muttering, I'm telling you, they're planning a big score, and they're fixing to put up an army to get after it. Grilby picked up a new glass to clean, thinking long and hard on what Gaster had said. Finally, he said, Well, thank you for warning, I suppose. You can repay the favor. Gaster stood and stretched his stiff joints. Trip west spent all the cash I had. I'm hurting for a horse and a place to stay. I'm sure the church could use a parson. I'd burn up once I walked in the front doors right in front of God and everyone. Oh, shut up. It's true, Gaster insisted, though there was a fine humor in his voice. Be ashamed to put a scorch in them floors just as soon as they got put down. You could probably ask around the Dreamer place. Grilby finally relented. They'll be doing the roundup soon. All that stock out grazing's got to be roped and branded for the drive come summer. Most of the folks around town pitch in and help if they can, but Dreamer's got a lot of land. He normally hires a few wandering hands to help out. For as much as he could, with no flush to speak of, Gaster flashed him a fierce grimace. I ain't run a drive in my whole life. No, but you can ride a horse. And I've seen you make use of a lasso. Grilby flickered a smirk. Even if you ain't good with it. Gaster scowled at the floor, drumming the counter impatiently with his spindly fingers. Then a bit meekly he asked, You one of the folks that help with the drive? Sure shit. Think you can get me hired? Bet I could get you a horse, too. Dreamers like me. Can't imagine why. I've met porcupines softer'n you. You insult me one more time, Mr. Gaster. Grilby threatened mightily, though there was a laugh catching at the edge of his flame. And I swear I'll march you right over to that church you're so scared of and light you on fire myself. Dramatic as a dime store theater, Gaster whipped the hat off his bony head and said, Now you just hold your temper there, Mr. Grilby, sir. I didn't mean nothing by it. You know I think you're just the most cuddliest pussy cat this side of the Appalachian Mountains. Why, I bet they hold parades in yonder just as soon as you walk outside at least twice a week, sir. Grilby shoved Gaster hard in the shoulder, setting the skeleton into a rattling laugh that bounced off the walls of the empty bar. It was damn near infectious enough to send Grilby chuckling himself. Now you better not make any mischief, Grilby warned at length, his voice cutting sharp and stern. I've got a reputation to keep around here." "Oh, come on, Grilby." Gaster grinned, and for a moment Grilby truly thought the devil himself was smiling in the dark of his bar. Sure enough, Gaster lied like he was. "I ain't never made trouble a single day in my life."